friends, and in this video, we're going to go over how to assess whether or not you're ready to apply for medical school in the upcoming cycle. So my mentality with a lot of this is, to know what to work on, you need to know what you're working towards. In this session, we're covering what do successful applications look like, so what are the actual components of a completed application, and what do admissions committees consider to be good applications. Then, after we have an idea of what to work towards, we'll work backwards. How can you tell whether or not you're ready to apply? So first, what does a successful application look like? What are even the components of a completed application? So broken down, the primary application consists of basic info, identifying information, childhood information, family income and information, and funding for post-secondary education, your stats, so transcripts and grades, and your MCAT scores, essays, so the disadvantaged or now called the other impactful experiences essay, works and activities, and the personal statement, your letters of recommendation, and your school list. Once you submit your primary, you'll need to complete secondary applications to the individual schools, and I cover the details on how to do this in another video. So skipping over the demographics information section of the application, both AMCAS, which is for MD programs, and AACOMAS, which is for DO programs, are going to ask you to hand input every grade you've ever received at any upper level institution, so any grades you received at the collegiate level. Note that this includes every F, every D, every withdrawal, and every retaken class, and every one of these grades will be incorporated into the calculation for your application GPA. When you submit the application, the final report will generate the stats summary page as part of your application. This will have a summary of your GPAs and your MCATs. Some things worth noting, you have 3 relevant GPAs: your bio, chem, physics, and math, all other, and total cumulative GPA. There are also individual lines for each year by status. So if you're a super senior but don't graduate, this gets added to your senior year GPA. Undergraduate postbacks get a separate line, and graduate classes like special master's programs get a separate line. This is also where your MCAT scores will populate. Every score automatically gets uploaded from most recent to the oldest. The essays portion of your application will generally consist of your works and activities and your personal statement. For a handful of you for whom this applies, AMCAS also has the optional Other Impactful Experiences essay. The Other Impactful Experiences essay gets 1325 characters, and again, this is only on AMCAS. I go into depth on who this applies to and how to write the Other Impactful Experiences essay in another video, so if you need more information on this, check out the link in the description. For both AMCAS and AACOMAS, you get a section for works and activities essays. AMCAS gives you 700 characters for each slot with a maximum of 15 slots. You can designate 3 of these 15 slots to be most meaningful activities, which will give you an additional 1,325 characters. AACOMAS, on the other hand, gives you 600 characters for each slot, an unlimited number of slots, but no most meaningful activities. And then the personal comment gets 5,300 characters for both AMCAS and AACOMAS. So on AMCAS, there are 19 ways in which you can categorize your works and experiences. Since there are more categories than there are slots, you obviously don't need to hit every category, and that's 100% not expected of you to do so. I've bolded a couple of the higher yield categories, but we'll elaborate more in a second on which categories are high yield and why. AACOMAS, on the other hand, has an unlimited number of slots, but you only get 600 characters instead of 700 characters. And the categories of activities fall into 2 major categories of either experiences or achievements. Okay, so we've covered the components of the application, but what do admissions committees look for and prioritize when reviewing applications? What do good applications have or highlight that makes some candidates a better fit than others? This table comes from a 2023 survey of 128 MD schools who were asked how important were the following data about academic preparation, experiences, attributes and personal competencies, bio and demographic characteristics, and interview results in identifying the applicants to either interview or offer an acceptance, on a scale of 1 to 4, with 1 being not important and 4 being very important. The average of the importance rating for each factor was calculated, and the factors were organized and listed in order of mean importance rating. So going back to the application breakdown, since the demographics information is not really something you can readily change, your letters of recommendation should be shaped by your experiences, and your school list should be shaped by your stats and experiences to determine where your background best fits. I'm really going to focus on 2 main parts of the application: your stats, which consist of your grades and your MCATs, and the major essays. And those mainly deal with these 2 sections of the chart. For academic metrics, we have cumulative BCPM GPA, cumulative undergraduate GPA, the GPA trend, total MCAT scores, completion of PreMed prerequisites, MCAT score trend, and post-pack work GPA. Listed under experiences, we have clinical volunteering, non-clinical volunteering, shadowing, leadership, and clinical employment. And I want to note that it's not that the other items in the other categories don't hold any value whatsoever, but it's worth identifying what will give you the biggest bang for your buck in terms of your time commitment and benefits your application. So again, looking at the academic metrics first, where these line up on your stats summary sheet, first priority is the biochem, physics, and math cumulative GPA, then your overall cumulative GPA, your GPA trend, then MCAT total, then, assuming you've completed the majority of your pre-med prerequisite course requirements, your MCAT trends, and lastly, pre-med post-bac work. Okay, that's great. We know what they consider most important, but what stats are good enough? This is a breakdown of the combination of stats that applicants and accepted applicants had between 2020 through 2023. And there are a couple things that I want to note here. First, over the 3 years, the overall rate of acceptance was about 41%, which objectively means the average applicant had slightly worse odds of getting into medical school than correctly calling heads on a coin flip. So highlighted in this version, green is everything above 40%, so these combinations are either as favorable or more favorable than the average applicant. Everything between 30 and 40% is highlighted in orange, where the odds are not quite as favorable, but with compelling experiences, people made it happen, and then I didn't bother highlighting below 30%. It's worth noting that these stats will differ and the green ranges will likely expand for DO schools. However, it's also worth noting that DO schools will still look for competitive ranges of extracurriculars in addition to meeting some minimum thresholds for stats. Before we jump to conclusions, stats aren't everything though. Below is some text from the same report noting the various factors and how heavily they're weighed into consideration for admissions. The highlighted portion states, 94% of admissions officers rated criteria other than stats as being just as or more important in making acceptance offers, and 86% rated criteria other than stats as being just as or more important when inviting applicants to interview. This more or less translates to meaning that once you've proven academically competent enough to handle the rigor of medical school, the other components of your app are what are going to tip the scale in your favor or against you. Going back to the table of factors organized by mean importance rating, listed in the high importance category for experiences are clinical volunteering, non-clinical volunteering, shadowing, leadership, and paid clinical experiences. And while it didn't quite make the high importance threshold, I think it's worth noting that the highest factor listed next is research. The mean importance ratings for those factors are pretty decently aligned with the acceptance data from the matriculants questionnaire, showing that of the applicants across 3 years who received at least one acceptance, almost 95% shadowed a physician or other health professional, around 91% volunteered in a healthcare setting, around 88% volunteered in a non-healthcare setting, and around 58% reported participating in research during undergrad. Okay, so now we know what categories we need to hit, but how many hours in each category are enough? So these are some numbers reported by the NIH PreMed advisors to their advisees based on the PreMed advisors' conversations with AdComs. Generally, some screening criteria used to prioritize applicants with stronger experiences are about 100 hours minimum of clinical experience, about 100 hours minimum of non-clinical volunteering experience, around 100 hours of shadowing that demonstrates continued interest in gaining exposure and insight into what a physician's job really entails, but it's worth noting that this is the most checkboxy of all the activities. And the more clinical experience you have either volunteering-wise or as paid employment, the fewer hours you're likely able to get away with. And then lastly, research is also becoming a bit of a soft requirement as we saw in the last slide. But how much research is enough? It's hard to say since experiences in different labs and different settings will differ with a lot of variability, but generally you should have enough experience that you understand what the question is you're asking, how you're investigating that question, how you're measuring the results if you have any results at this stage, and what conclusions you can safely come to. Second major question that I think is worth clarifying, what do I mean by screening? When I say screening, I think it's really important to note that I don't mean screening to get an interview. So, schools won't come outright and say that they use screening and filter functions when they comb through candidates, but it's not uncommon for AdComs to use search criteria and filtering criteria to decrease the workload of members who actually review the applications by hand. So generally, you're often not being evaluated in the order in which your application comes in necessarily, so much as the pile is being periodically checked via search functions and filters throughout the cycle. So in order to fill a class with a certain degree of variation in profiles and experience, they'll sort apps based on different criteria. Say they want maybe 20% of the class to have a strong research background. They might set the search function to sort by hours in research, publications, or posters listed, and then sort through the top of the pile to prioritize who to interview next. It's most certainly possible to still get an interview without meeting some of these screening criteria, but it significantly improves your odds if you're able to meet them. However, again, it's worth recognizing that it's not as simple as fulfilling a certain number of hours. How you write about the experience can absolutely make or break the application. If you find that you've done X number of hours in an activity, but you can't speak meaningfully to how you contributed to the community that you served, or what you learned about the community that you served, or how this activity contributed to your growth, then this activity is a wasted entry and does not belong on your application. So now that we know what we're aiming for, how do we know if we're ready to apply? To be honest, you're unlikely to ever feel ready to apply. But there are some major questions you can ask yourself to determine your likelihood of success with the application process. So first, when looking at the AMCAS GPA-MCAT combinations chart, are you comfortable with your odds based on the odds other applicants with comparable stats had in the cycles before you? If you're a little shaky on this, do you have significant extracurriculars that could help compensate for potentially less than amazing stats? Second, do you currently or will you have the minimum number of hours to get you past screening by the time of submitting the application? It's worth noting that you can project hours for things that you're doing during your application year, but projected hours will not weigh nearly as strongly as completed hours, so it's worth playing it safe. And lastly, but most certainly not least, do you know why you want to be a physician? The main purpose of the extracurricular experiences are to give you the exposure and experiences to learn about the communities you will serve and about yourself and your own fit for the profession, dealing with not only health and wellness, but a profession fundamentally geared towards serving others and problem solving. It's in your best interest to have figured out what about working with patients, or making people feel better, or serving others, and committing several hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and about a decade of your life to this career is actually drawing you into this profession. Medical schools and residency programs also spend significant resources on training you too, so it's in their best interest to know that the people they accept are going into this with their eyes open and for the right reasons. That being said, you most certainly don't have to nail every single one of these questions in order to do well in an application cycle. You're likely never going to feel ready to apply, and there will always be areas of your application that could have been improved upon. So only you know your situation best and the decision that would ultimately be best for you. So best of luck, and I'll see you in the next video.